Hello, welcome back to Conan Exiles, and this is a brief recap on a talk the devs gave a few weeks ago about the latest age, the Age of War, that's replacing the Age of Sorcery, which is what we currently have. Yeah, they did a Twitch stream that lasted about an hour and 40 minutes. A lot of waffling, but some interesting tidbits here and there, so I'm going to try and condense that down. One thing I found quite interesting was the fact that the developers consider these ages to be opportunities to fix the game or add things that have been requested. So Age of Sorcery was developed in response to requests from a magic system in Conan Exiles. And in the same way, the Age of War is designed to fix the Purge system. So in a sense, the Age of War is all about the Purge. It's a complete overhaul with some extra bells and whistles on top of that. And it was hinted, and I say only hinted, that the next age, the age after the Age of War, we might see some extensions to the map, to the Exiles map, because that's something that a lot of people have been asking for a long time. And they sort of, they nodded towards it, but it was very vague, so please don't quote me on that. Anyway, to start off, we might as well remind ourselves about the lore of the Purge. I'll go through it as briefly as I can, but essentially the modern exiled lands were created by Tothamon, this Stygian sorcerer. He got the Ghost Wall up and running again, reactivated the bracelets, and he's been using the exiled lands like a giant prison. So you've got these exiles running around within the Ghost Wall, and they're busy collecting stuff and weapons and loot and whatever. And then the Purge comes along and essentially pinches everything they've collected. So in lore terms, the Purges are there to hoover up all the goodies that the exiles have been discovering within the exiled lands. Although what we've got now is strayed away from that a little bit, in that most Purges are things like spiders and skeletons, which just beat you up and tear down your property. So the new Purge in the Age of War is designed to go back to its roots and create a scenario where people are actually stealing things from you. So as in all the ages, there are 3 chapters. In chapter 1, we're introduced to the concept of treasure, which you go out and collect, and then you can sell that treasure to build up your base defensively. I'll talk more about the treasure in a minute. But in chapter 2, this is when we get the new improved Purge system, and Purges are going to be more like sieges. So rather than just a few enemies rocking up occasionally, what will happen is that your enemies will build camps near you, and they'll assault your base using siege engines. So we're going to see new trebuchets and things like battering rams, etc. And these apparently are going to be quite serious attacks with a lot of troops, rather than a few scorpions or something like that. And the more you've built up your base to survive a Purge, the stronger the Purge will be. And lastly, in chapter 3, you'll have an opportunity to put things into reverse. A big feature of the Age of War is that the Stygians are invading the exiled lands, and they're building their own bases around the place, gathering their own treasure. And in chapter 3, you'll have the opportunity to go and attack those bases and steal things from them. So it all sounds quite jolly, really, doesn't it? And another big change is that Purges aren't going to be random anymore. Before you had to wait for your Purge meter to fill up, and then you would get a Purge at some point. But now you opt into Purges, and you can say when you want one. So you can plan ahead and only call up a Purge when you're ready for one. Anyhow, chapter 1 introduces the concept of a treasure room. And to build a treasure room, you will make a coffer. And a coffer is like a large chest that you keep all your treasure. And alongside the coffer, you get your own thrall accountant who keeps a tally of all the treasure you've got. So the idea is that you build a coffer and you put it into a space. And that space becomes your treasure room. And any items that are marked treasure that are placed in that area are tallied up by the thrall and added to your treasure total, if you like. So treasure comprises of things like gold bars and silver coins, etc. The stuff you might expect to be treasure. But there's also going to be stuff called heroic treasure, which is objects like statues of cats and war horns and gilded harps and things like that. And you'll find these in camps like you would normal loot. And each of these will carry a treasure tag, so you know what's treasure and what isn't. So you go out, you raid a base, find some treasure, then you have to carry it back physically, which is interesting. You put it in your treasure room, next to your coffer, and then the value of that item is added to your total. And as I said before, you can use your treasure to improve the defensive capabilities of your base. I'm not sure how, to be honest with you, but you can. So carrying treasure around is going to be quite interesting. Obviously you can't fight while you're carrying treasure, but if you're attacked you can just drop it and beat off whoever's after you. At the moment you can't put your treasure onto a horse, but in the future I think they're hoping to have like camels and horses or some sort of pack animals that you can use to cart treasure around for you. But the good news is that you can actually transport yourself while you're carrying treasure, so you can use a transportery stone or a map room, supposedly. And here we can see a treasure room that's been built, and aside from the items of treasure like the cat statues and everything else, you can decorate it with piles of coins. And this like swirly pattern indicates the extent of the treasure room, so anything within that area that is treasure will be counted. Now when you steal treasure from a camp, the only things stopping you are the NPCs, the people living in the camp. But in chapter 2 they're going to introduce relic hunters who will like pursue you and try and steal your things, so chapter 2 will make the whole process a lot more fraught and dangerous. So that's broadly the treasure system. Something else the Age of War is introducing is a system where you can create clan emblems. So there's a new workbench where you can use various tools to craft emblems for your clan, but you have to use what's provided by the game. You can't import your own icons and motifs, etc. Though apparently modders will be able to do this in the stuff they create. So you'll be given a limited number of motifs and emblems to use initially, but you'll be able to earn more in the battle pass as you go through it. So once you've created your own distinctive clan emblem, you can put it on shields and banners and these horse coats that are being introduced. And the proper name of these horse coats is caparisons apparently. But once you've created an emblem, you can go back and edit it at any time, and any edits you make in the workbench will automatically cascade out to all the items you've decorated with that emblem. So you don't have to go running around updating shields and banners individually. The game will do that for you, which is obviously a huge time saver. For the New Age, there's obviously going to be a new battle pass, and because Stygians are invading the exiled lands, there's going to be a strong Stygian theme to the battle pass. And as well as picking up new clan emblems, there's also going to be a new class of emote in the game, and these emotes are ones that utilise weapons. So for example, if you've got a thrall with a spear, you'll be able to pick up an emote that's for spear practice. Or if a thrall has got a two-handed sword, they can use the "You shall not pass" emote, which has your thrall standing guard, clutching this massive sword. And they look quite good, to be honest with you. I'm quite looking forward to those. Aside from that, it's all the usual stuff you'd expect in the Battle Pass, so not too much to talk about there. We will also see changes to combat, and apparently these changes will be seen most strongly in Chapter 2. And the main change is that there's going to be an increased stamina cost for attacks, especially heavy attacks. However, to compensate for that, you're going to get faster stamina recovery, and heavy attacks are going to be much more powerful. But there's not going to be any increase in stamina cost for things like climbing or sprinting. Now the devs admitted that this will impact players who have a corrupted build, and really the solution there is to wear armour with built-in stamina, essentially. Other combat changes are that enemies will have less health but deal more damage, and in Chapter 2 NPCs will no longer attack you in mobs, so if you go into a large camp you're not going to aggro loads and loads of people at once. The aggro area for NPCs has been reduced, so you could go to a large camp like New Azagarth and you'd only sort of aggro 2 or 3 people at a time, which never really bothered me, to be honest with you, because I could go into a camp and I think the most people who'd attack you at once was like 4 or 5, as long as you didn't go too far inside. But anyway, that's something they've decided to do. And if you run away, it seems that enemies will no longer chase you very far. Not that they chase you very far at the moment, so it's another questionable change in my opinion. I'd actually prefer it if they did chase you a bit longer. I think it would be quite nice if you had a few relentless pursuers who just chased you down no matter what. I think that would be quite fun. Large enemies like dragons and mammoths and frost giants will now have multiple attack points. So before, the attack point for a mammoth, for example, was some nebulous point within the creature itself, which meant that attacks were quite odd. You'd run at a mammoth and sometimes you'd be swinging at its legs, other times at the top of its head. But now you can actually target individual limbs or the head or the back and things like this. And I think one of the things this will solve is the fact that you quite often get sucked inside an animal while you're fighting it, which I find quite annoying. So the multiple attack points on large creatures could be quite good. Another thing is that you'll be able to aim your attacks better. So once you've launched an attack, you'll be able to change the direction of that attack slightly. Because what happens now is that you can attack someone, they move off, and then you're just swinging at fresh air. But now if they move, you can follow them around a little bit. I mean, it's not perfect, but the devs are hoping that this will make fighting more realistic, which in fairness it should do if it works. Other changes are the introduction of 2 skull bosses, so we have 1 skull bosses and 3 skull bosses, but we're now getting an intermediate boss. They didn't say too much about those. And there's also going to be some changes to weapons. So for example, legendary weapons can no longer be created. You have to go out and find them in the world. And those weapons are also going to be less durable. So you can still repair a damaged legendary weapon, but each time you repair it, its total health goes down. So at some point it's just going to become useless. And they spoke about durability only in terms of legendary weapons, but I think it's probably going to be applied to weapons across the board. I wouldn't be surprised. There's also going to be a new type of weapon called a unique weapon. And they're not the strongest weapons in the game, but generally they're going to be better than the ones you can craft yourself. And these are going to be found quite often in loot, apparently. And talking of loot, in Chapter 2 there's going to be a huge change in loot. They're getting rid of all the boring loot, apparently. If you go into a camp and open up a chest, you're not going to keep finding branches and wood and fibre. You're only going to find sort of valuable items and or items that have been crafted in some way. And I think these unique weapons are going to be quite an important feature of camp loot in the future. Now I'm quite pleased about this because I've complained about boring loot quite a few times, but I am reminded that quite often I'll go into a dungeon without a torch and then have to make one using the materials I find in a loot chest, so that might be a two-edged sword for me. I'm just going to have to make sure I'm properly equipped before I go into a dungeon. So overall I think that's a very welcome change. No more boring loot. As far as the environment goes, the age of sorcery is over, so there's not going to be any blood moon eclipses anymore, which is a shame really because I quite like those. So we're seeing the return of night, but night isn't going to be as dark as before. It's going to have more like of a dusk feel to it, which is not a change I think is necessary really. I quite enjoy the fact that in many parts of the map, when it's night it's completely dark. There are quite a few occasions where I've been in the middle of the jungle and it's turned dark, and I haven't been able to see the hand in front of my face. And with all the jungle sounds surrounding you, that was quite atmospheric, so yeah, I'm in two minds about that change. I don't think it's necessary. There was a few more random items. For example, there's a new diving animation, which everyone was quite excited about. And this just means you can dive into water. And you can dive into anything you want if you like, but it's meant for diving into water. Another thing is that we're obviously keeping all our spells from the Age of Sorcery, but they're making a few changes to some of them. So for example, the illumination spells that you have, and the things like detect resources, those will no longer be on a timer. You'll get them going, and they'll keep running until you switch them off, by essentially repeating the rite that started them, which is quite welcome as far as I'm concerned. I think that's a good idea. And last but not least, we've got these new dungeon building pieces being introduced. So for example, you can shackle a prisoner to a wall, as this guy's being shackled here. But at the moment, if you shackle a thrall to a wall, you can't get them out again, so it's one way essentially. But at some point apparently they are going to figure out how you can release a thrall from the shackles, so you can use things like this for thrall storage. But that's the only dungeon piece I saw. I'm guessing there's quite a few in the battle pass, but it might be we have to pay for them in the bazaar. They didn't actually say how they were going to be released, but I can see dungeon pieces being something I might fork out some money for myself. Anyhow, that's about it. I hope it was useful. The Age of War starts in a few days, I think on the 22nd of June, so I shall definitely be restarting the game for that, and hopefully see you there. And until I do see you again, I shall say goodbye. Okay then, cheerio.